Hello, I'm retired Battalion Chief Larry Cockman from the Greensboro, North Carolina Fire Department History Book Committee. We're here today at the Greensboro Historical Museum. I'm standing in front of the General Greene, the first steam pumper, or as they called it back then, a steamer. Today, December 9th, 2019, we are starting a new tradition of recording and preserving the heritage and culture of our retirees. Our retirees have contributed so much to the success of our great fire department. Their stories retire with them and are sometimes gone forever when they pass away. They will share their emergency calls that will always be a part of their memories forever. So sit back and listen as they carry us through their journey in the Greensboro Fire Department.
My name is Gordon M. Perry, and I'm 92 years old at the present time. I hope I'll make another year or two. But I'm originally from Rome, Georgia. It's my home place. Well, it's a pretty long story. The reason I got hired here is I worked for the American France Fire Engine Company for several years, and I delivered several pieces of equipment here in Greensboro. And along about the time that I was delivering these trucks, the city became a 100,000 population. Therefore, you come under the National Board of Fire Underwriters. And by getting under the National Board of Fire Underwriters, they came in for an inspection. The fire department was in bad shape, as it was. So they had a year to make up this deficit that they had in the services that they had. So they started looking for somebody to hire. And I had been on the road with American France, traveling the 7 southeastern states and Cuba. That was my territory. And I was about ready to get off the road. And I had made a statement that I was going to soon quit that company and get off the road. And someone heard that, and they sent me up to the chief's office, or he sent for me. Moon Myrick was the chief. And he wanted to know if I was looking for a job. I said, well, not really. I said, I've got a job. I said, I'm not really looking for one right now, but I said, I have got to get off the road and quit this traveling. And so he offered me a job. I told him, I says, Chief Wyke, I appreciate the offer here, but I says, I know I can't quit a job like I'm making. I says, I make more money than most of your chiefs in this department working for American France. And I says, I just couldn't quit and take a job here for doing what you want me to do. So he dropped it for a little while, and he come back later on and wanted me to come back and talk with Chief Boucher, who was administrative chief at that time. And he looked up, got with the city manager, adjusted the salary situation, and offered me a pretty good deal. I had to take a cut in pay to come here, but I decided that I would take the job. And so I took the job with the stipulation that he would notify everybody that why I was coming here to work. Because not back then they didn't hire many firemen from outside. When I first came here, we still had a assistant chief over the maintenance division. And I was scheduled to take his place because he was going to be retiring shortly. He had 44 years with the city. And I told the chief I didn't think it was legal for me to come in there as an officer over him. I said, I think you should at least notify him what you expect him to do. And I took it for granted that he did that. As I found out when I did come here that they didn't. Nobody knew I was coming to work here except the chief and the chief officers at the office. So there was a lot of controversy about me coming to work here. So I didn't accept the title of assistant chief till Huck retired. And that was about 1961, I guess. Huck Ballinger.
He was the head.
Yeah. And when he retired, then they appointed me assistant chief of the maintenance division. Well, the first thing that I was to do here was to bring the department up with the trucks that they had. When the underwriters was here running their test, they only had about 2 or 3 trucks that passed the test, the underwriter's test. And so that was one of my jobs, to get all of that equipment back up to par to where it would work, and establish a record system that they did not have here, and something that would bring it up to the National Board standards. Well, the 12-cylinder engines that they had three pumpers, I believe it was, my memory is correct, that was 1947 model American LaFrancis. Those were with the triple flow pumps, which was a new pump to American LaFrancis. They had just designed it and come out with it along at that time. And they had some modifications that come up on them. And they did not contact LaFrance for them to send the parts down here to pull those modifications. So they had pumps breaking down. They had engines wearing out. And come to find out that after I came here and started doing some checking, they were buying reclaimed oil and putting in those 12-cylinder engines. And those engines are right precision-built engines. They were built especially for fire equipment. And every one of them had to be rebuilt. And not just bore them. We had to re-sleeve those big 12-cylinders, the big engines. We had one of the small engines. So that one we could bore and fix it. So, in knowing this situation, when I found out about the underwriters, they didn't even have the paperwork for the runner assist. They didn't have it, no records kept on none of that stuff. So I had to look around. I couldn't find them. Never did find them until later on. I called the American France factory where I had worked before and got them to send me copies of them so I could establish the records straight with the underwriter's test. And it took a long time. It took us a little over a year to get all of it up to par and running. I contacted the factory on the recall on those pumps had been long gone. So this was in 1960 when I came here. And in 1947, when those were bought, the modification come out about 1948, and it had never been done. And I contacted the American France factory, talked with the gentleman, vice president of the company, Hugh Walker, who was a friend of mine too, and a boss. And he told me that since I was here with American France doing some delivery work, he said, go ahead and I'll send you the kits at no charge to the city. And you can stay there at no charge to the city and rebuild all of those pumps. And we'll write it off. And he understood some of the process that we were going through here in Greensboro at that time. And he was a real nice fellow to work with. There were several good brands of fire engines. I just so happened to work for American LaFrance, and I was more familiar with them than any others, although I had worked on a lot of different other brands. Because before I went to American LaFrance to work, I worked for Lockheed Aircraft, taking care of all their crash equipment. And so I had a little bit more experience on different types of equipment than just American LaFrance. We changed a lot of rules when I came here. As one of the captains was well known at speaking his piece, Mick Newman. He said all I had done since I've been here was make rules and regulations. But I did make a lot of changes in some of the paperwork that had to be done to get the record system up to the National Board standard. Chief Wyrick, Chief Boucher, Chief Powell, Flowers, and Jones come in after I had left. All of them were different, yeah. Chief Wyrick, a lot of people didn't like Chief Wyrick. He was a boisterous type fellow. He would cuss you out in a heartbeat and pat you on the back the next minute. He was a good guy to work for, and you had to know him to get along with him. And I didn't have no problem with him. Chief Boucher was, if everything's going right, he's happy. And it didn't make any difference to him. As long as everything was going right, he was right with you. And Chief Powell, he was pretty much, he was trained under Moon Wyrick, and he was pretty much the same. He had some of his own ideas that he tried to push in there, but he was all right to work for. Ray was a good guy to work for. Ray pretty much left you alone with anything that he wasn't familiar with. He felt that you was handling it, and that was it.
Okay.
Well, automatic transmission was coming into play before I left American La France. Although Greensboro did not have any automatic transmissions at the time. They were more expensive, and at the time I came here, money was short, and they were trying to upgrade the department, and we stayed away from trying to spec them in the trucks because they were pretty much experimental with fire trucks. As you know, the pump engine, it has to be in a direct drive. They had not perfected that shift in the automatic transmission in direct drive to hold it in direct drive. So as you start pumping with automatic transmission, you shut a nozzle off, it wants to change gears. So that does not work with a fire truck too well. So there had to be a lot of ifs and ands about fixing automatic transmissions to work with fire trucks. But it was in the process, and most of the ones that they had been experimenting with American La France was in ladder trucks where they didn't have the pump to deal with. But they did have automatic transmissions in 1956, 57, 58.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, besides keeping up all the work that you have, the workload that you have in the department, a guy in the shop needs to stay abreast of everything's changing, because everything changes. It don't stay the same forever. And there's different things coming up, and it's a mechanic is a business that you got to stay on top of everything. You need the training, and you need to get all the training you can get while you're in the shop, in what you're doing. Well, I thought some about an association to train mechanics. Where do you find fire truck mechanics at? There's nowhere. You can't go out to a shop in town and pick up a fire truck mechanic. You go out and find a car mechanic or a truck mechanic, but there's no fire engine mechanics. And I had talked with the American La France people, the vice president of the company, and several other departments around the country, and it was something that needed to be done. And I was asked to teach a class in I guess it was probably the North Carolina Pump School at Rocky Mount, when it was held there at one time. And I made a sort of a speech at that thing that they needed some mechanical skills being taught in these schools, not just on pumps, but on routine maintenance of the trucks and everything else. So several people got interested in it, and they came around to me again to come and make another talk on that situation. So I did. I made several speeches about it and my own opinions and everything, and I thought it was something to be done. I got sort of elected to head that association by letting my mouth speak too much. So we started with a group of us. We got us a board and started an association and formed a school. And we had the first fire truck mechanic school here in Greensboro. And that was about 1963. We foot the bill ourselves here at the department. Chief Wyrick, he got on board with us on it. As long as it wasn't costing him no money, we were happy. So he got on board, and he liked the publicity from it too. We had it for about 4 years, I suppose. There was about 4 classes here in Greensboro. We helped one in Rocky Mount, and it seemed like we had one somewhere else. I can't remember now.
Okay.
Well, a lot of things that the National Board used to be real strict on in fire equipment is everything had to be manual. It had to have if you had anything that was electrically operated, it had to have a manual override. And down the line, when ISO took over, they kind of released that, and they come into electric primers, you know, electric operator primers, electric changeover valves, little electronics come in to be. But where the National Board had it, if you had a electric primer, it had to have a manual override. Everything had to have a manual override. And I suppose that's where come in years ago as a dual ignition on fire engines. They were not, some of them were not dependable at times, and so they had a dual ignition system, almost all of them. Gosh, with LaFrance, I worked on everything that they ever sold, actually. I even had the experience of helping operate a steamer at one time. But about the oldest motorized one was probably 1920. I worked on a lot of 1920s, 22s, 23s, 24s. Well, the only one that I knew here was Huck Ballinger. Of course, he was here. I think he worked during the war. He left the fire department during the war and went to work somewhere in Virginia for DuPont at an explosive plant somewhere in DuPont during the war. But then they come back to Greensboro, went right back to mechanic in the fire department. And I worked with a lot of them around the country. That I have a list of all their names in a book at the house. I kept a list of their names, their number of the truck that they had in that department, and the days I was there and what I'd done in that department. Yeah, the mechanics have got a heck of a job anywhere on anything. Everything's being improved. We got electric cars now, and we got things that we never had before. And I tried to push that when I came here. I said, all this ignition systems, batteries, and all this is all changing. I said, it's going to be changing before we ever retire. And I did experiment with some of it. I took 3 cars when we went to the battalion system here. I took one of the 3 cars, stripped all the ignition systems off of it and put transistor ignitions on it because we didn't have nothing else with transistor ignitions. And that's the thing that was coming along in the past. Now about all year, gasoline engines got transistor ignitions. So we experimented with that one particular truck, kept a record of it, and it just amazed me at the differences. Well, about one of the proudest things I think I have done What I did as far as establishing a record system for the fire equipment here and getting all the trucks up to date, that was a big job. But about the proudest thing was starting that mechanic school. It opened the door for a lot of people. You would be surprised at people over the United States that we had wanting to come to the school. We had people as far as California that contacted us to come here to this school that we had started. And I'm sorry to say that some of the fire chiefs frowned on it, didn't want to fool with it. Money-wise, they thought it was a union that we were trying to start, which we were not. That was the farthest thing from our mind. It was an association of a group of mechanics that didn't request anything except knowledge. In fact, that was the first one that well, there had been one in California several years before, and it phased out because we had people out there that were still wanting to come to a school, and they were willing to come all the way across country to ours. No, I wound up joining the Masons in probably 1970, somewhere in 1970. And that was the only fraternal organization that I ever belonged to at the time. I stayed away from even the American Legion until after I retired. I didn't end up joining it until after I retired. I served about 6 years, a little over 6 years in the Navy. All during the war, I was most fortunate during the war years in the 44, 45, and I was in Florida. Wow. And of all things, I wound up on a crash crew, so I had something to do with fire equipment. So I was on a crash crew in Jacksonville, Florida, at the municipal airport. That was the Naval Auxiliary Air Station. And when the war was over, I had shipped over for 4 more years, and I'd already been in 2 years. So I finally got transferred down to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, to the airport. I was at Fort Lauderdale on the crash crew when Flight 19 disappeared. I was on duty the night that they were supposed to have got back. They never did show up. Well, Flight 19 was it's been on every television station you can think of about the Bermuda Triangle. This flight of 5 TBMs or TBFs, they was on a navigational flight. They're making a triangle flight out of Fort Lauderdale. They had an instructor with them, and there was 3 men on each plane. And they made their triangle flight and was headed back to Fort Lauderdale. They thought they didn't know where they were at. They claimed all their compasses was out on all 5 airplanes. They had an instructor who was a well-qualified instructor with them, and he was trying to hold them together. I was sitting in the tower listening to their conversation, what little conversation they had, because it was broken up. It was not the best of weather. It was sort of overcast, rainy, but they did not know where they were at. And the instructor instructed them to all stay together and go down together. Well, they went down somewhere. They don't know where. They haven't found them yet. I don't know anything about the Bermuda Triangle other than what I read in the paper or what I hear, but I do know there's some rough water in it. I sailed through it a lot afterwards. When I left Fort Lauderdale, I went to Norfolk and went aboard a ship. I stayed on that ship for 4 years. So, and that ship became the first missile ship the Navy had. I made the first cruise on it to Greenland, and it was a seaplane tender. Of course, we were going up to Thule, Greenland. They did not have an air base there then. There was no base there. Nothing was there. So they had to have air support, so they take a seaplane. Well, the seaplane didn't work out too good up there. There was too many icebergs floating around. and it kept knocking the pontoons off the TBMs. So we come back to Norfolk and finally went into the Philadelphia Navy Yard after riding out 2 hurricanes in Norfolk. We came into Norfolk and anchored at Chesapeake Bay, and no sooner got anchored and some of the crew went on leave, they got the call to get underway. We had a skeleton crew on board, and the reason we were getting underway, they ordered all ships out of Chesapeake Bay for hurricanes. There was a hurricane coming up the coast. So we got underway with a skeleton crew and rode out that hurricane. And we did another one later on. The next year we rode out another one. If you want some rough water, ride out a hurricane off Cape Hatteras. Well, I've had a lot of hobbies. I've built model airplanes, I've built model ships, I've built a little everything. I do a little painting. I do some painting. I've got to have it now, painting all my Christmas cards for every year. Yeah, I have been known to go fishing and wet a hook. I was one of the instrumental ones in getting a fishing club started at Cape Hatteras. Chief Price and myself, we used to go fishing all the time together, and we stayed at the same motel down there, and every time we'd go down there, they'd go up $3 or $4 on the bill. It wasn't all that expensive, but we sitting around one night talking, and so I mentioned something. I said, why don't you just buy a house down here or build a house, or buy a place and build a house? I said, come down here. I said, we can get enough in the fire department together to build one. I said, we got electricians, we got plumbers, we got everything in the department. So we got talking, and everybody got a little braver and braver, and we come back to the department and got to talking around, and didn't take us long to wind up with 20 people. We established it at 20 people. And I think our fee was $200 a piece. That was to start with. We just started off with $20 a piece, and with 20 of us. And we got a couple of guys to go down and look for us a place to build a house. And we found one, bought the property, bought all of the material here in Greensboro, what we didn't bum from people around that we knew, and hauled it all the way to Hatteras and built a house. And as far as I know, it's still standing. Yeah, you know, this whole department with an organization that Chief Wyrick had started years ago was called the 100 Club. We're sitting in one of the places that they helped build. The 100 Club was made up of biggest businessmen in Greensboro. And it was started for the reason to tell the businessmen what they thought of the city council, you know, and thank them for their support and everything that they did. And we had people like Joe Bryant and a lot of big businessmen in town. And we'd get together out here and have a fix a steak for them at the old Fireman's Club. That's where it finally wound up, just after doing a couple of them at Lee Forbes, had a Forbes Dick funeral home. The first ones they had was at his farm down at his lake. And he was instrumental in getting it started too. He and George Dix from Forbes Dick funeral home. And they held it together, and Chief Wyrick was the spokesman for the group. And this started in somewhere, I don't know the exact year, about 51, 52, somewhere along in there. I got involved in it before I even come to work with the city, when I was delivering some trucks here to Greensboro when I worked for American France. And Huck Ballinger was one of the ones from the shop that rounded up the cookers and the cooks to put these feeds on. So by working at the shop with him delivering, and he asked me one time if I'd go with him to do this. And this was about 1957, 58, somewhere. Whenever 9 and 10 was delivered, I think it's somewhere 57, 58. And he wanted to know if I'd be willing to help him. I said, yeah, I'd be helping. I said, I got to go either that or go over and sit at the motel and watch television. I said, yeah, I'll go with you. So I went and helped them put that feed on out there. And then the next year that I was back in here, they had another one, and so I helped them again. And then when I went to work there, it just fell on the garage personnel to put the things on. So we were doing all the work for them. Burnside, Cavness, and myself. We had all this stuff together. The 100 Club, as far as I know, is still active. I do not know who runs it now, because since I retired and when I retired from the fire department, I left Greensboro for a couple of years to go take care of my wife's sister. She lived in Alabama. Her husband got killed in a woods fire, and she was on this 80 acres of property by herself, trying to maintain it, and also had a strip mining coal off of it. So she had more than she could handle. So I actually retired earlier than I intended to, and moved down there to look after her until she passed away. And then I moved back to Greensboro. Well, naturally, all the old fishing club group, we were all pretty much hung together. Well, you got J.E. McCarter, who is still going, and Elvin Parrish is still here. Raymond Reddick is still here. And all the rest of them, I think, are just about passed away now. They were the members in it. And I didn't know a lot of the firemen at the stations because I wasn't that close with them. I mean, I was at the garage. I would see them when they bring a truck out, and that was about it, or when I was in a class. And I got to know a lot of them that way, but I didn't know them personally like you do with people that you ride with all the time. Well, yeah, there's very few people that know that we had a mechanic school here.
Yeah,
Because we didn't interfere with the training department at all. We used some of the facilities out there, and they used some of our facilities. If you ever remember the cutaway pump that set up in Trenton, that was donated to us in the mechanic school from American LaFrance. That was donated to us by Hugh Walker, the vice president of American LaFrance. He was on top of everything for this mechanic school. He wanted it bad and wanted it to prosper. But I'll go back to it a little bit. The reason it didn't prosper, that we lost some of the support of fire chiefs, thinking that it was a union, which it wasn't.
Right.
And they were not wanting to fund it in any way. And we didn't ask for much funds. Later on, as we got it started, we had I think a $10 initiation fee or something to come in. Well, it wasn't very much. It took care of the mailing and stuff. We also had the insurance organization that was doing some training in the fire service and different. They wanted to get involved in it. They wanted to take it over and run it through the insurance department. I told them no. I said, I know what you want to do with the insurance department. I said, I don't mind telling you. I said, you're wanting numbers of people. I said, we don't want numbers of people. We want the people that are interested. You want the people to go in there because your budget depends on the number of people you've got. I says, I want those people that need this to run. So I wouldn't turn it over to the insurance department. And they didn't like that. And And we kind of lost some of our support by trying to keep it in the fire department. And some of them, I've got stacks of letters that appraised it and everything, and a lot of the departments did. And one of the guys that appraised it was Sherman Pickard, if you ever remember that name. He was chief at Raleigh after. He was head of the insurance department at one time. In fact, he started that system with the insurance department. He was a good friend, and he found and sent somebody to that mechanic school, Ever School. He had somebody there every time. And he praised it, and he wanted it to keep going. And he understood what I was talking about. Because the insurance organization, they wanted numbers of people. They tried to get as many as they could in there because their budget is based on that. And I can understand that. I had several meetings with them on it, and I told them that's not what I want. And as long as I kept my name on it, it wasn't going to be it. I have, as I said before, there's a lot of them, you know, how I wound up in Greensboro. But that's how I wound up in Greensboro. It wasn't by choice. I had to get off the road. No, my wife passed away in 2012. And how she put up with me being on the road all them years, I don't know.
Good woman, right?
Yeah, good woman. But I worked for American France. I was on the road all the time. I come home and take my suitcase out of my car, and the phone rang, and I have to put it right back in there and leave.
Oh my goodness.
American LaFrance had servicemen all over the country. It was a fine company to work for in these days. It's a sad situation that it is now. All it is a name. But back when it started, it was one of the biggest fire truck manufacturers in the country. And it was started out by two guys, Truxton LaFrance and Asa LaFrance. They were brothers. And they started out, and they had worked for several other people that built steamer and fire equipment back in the old days. And their whole family wound up in the fire truck business. There's also a truck also called a Ward LaFrance. The Ward LaFrance that's his name. J. Ward LaFrance is his name. He was the son of, I think it was Asa LaFrance. That was his son. It could have been Truxton, but I'm pretty sure it's Asa LaFrance. One of them was a businessman, a good salesman, promoter, and the other one was an engineering genius. And they hit it off pretty big and made a big business for themselves. They had competition for many years with the Seagrave Corporation. In fact, at one time they got in trouble with Seagrave and American LaFrance with the government monopoly. Okay. They go into a town to bid on a truck. You get it this time, I'll get it next time. This situation. Well, it wasn't too much of a thing. There's only two big manufacturers around the country, but they had to break that monopoly up. I give this job. I told them I would not come here if they didn't make it all right with everybody, but they didn't do that. And my first year here was
pretty rough.
They were firemen. It was against me, my wife, and everybody else.
I know.
Because I had come here, and they had adjusted my salary accordingly to get me to come here.
As they should have.
And of course, I told them, I said, I can't come here if what you pay your firemen out there. I said, they're underpaid as it is right now. I said, and you need to do that along with the upgrading this department, you need to upgrade the salary for them. But they made it where I was able to come here, took a cut in pay. Yeah, I hope that, I know that they didn't lose their rate. They were in about a 6 when I came here.
6. Wow.
I believe that's where it was at, and they were fixing to drop that, you know, and the National Board gave them 1 year to do something. And that hiring me was part of that requirement. Not that it was me, it was to get that done, that I did at the maintenance. We did not have not one record in that maintenance department. It was a sad situation, to tell you the truth about it, to walk into. If anybody knew Huck, Huck was a fine fellow, and he was a good mechanic on the old 20s equipment. You couldn't beat him. I mean, he I'd tell you what was wrong with it, listening to it, but on everything new, he didn't know nothing about it. The shop was built in 1956 out there. Before that, they had the shop in the old Central Station on Green Street. The kitchen and the TV room was the 2 bays that was the shop. And the kitchen was where fire prevention was at, on the other side of the building. And Greensboro, see, had just become 100,000. And that's when you come under the National Board. Everything comes under the National Board. Everything before that is getting done by paperwork. It's almost volunteer status, is what it is. You just go in, they rate it is like a volunteer fire department almost. Although this department had been paid since 1926, I believe, is when it was first paid department. They built that station, I believe, in 1926 or 27 on Green Street. And some of those other stations around, there was one, 5 was on Mendenhall, but before that one on Mendenhall, there was one before that on Mendenhall further down. I don't know where you remember that, where that one's at.
I've read about it.
Yeah, there's one down there. And then there was one down, further down off of South Elm. What's the next street over from South Elm? Going, yeah, when I come to work here, I didn't even know where the fire stations were, all of them. I knew where Central Station was. I knew where 9 and 10 was because I just delivered trucks there. They had just been built. I delivered the first ones to 9 and 10. As you know, 9, it sits in a big lot, vacant lot to the side of it.
Yeah. And
also 10 used to have a big vacant lot to the side of it. Those stations were built with funds that were supposed to be a police station alongside of them. Somewhere down the line, they decided to sell the one on 10. They sold that lot off 10. But 9 still got their lot by the side. But that was supposed to be a police organization by the side of them, and the station 9. We run the test on those 2 trucks, 9 and 10, at Hamilton Lakes, which had just been taken into the city. When we finished running the test, I took the crews from 9 out there at Hamilton Lakes over in the residential section to do a little training, operating the pump and so forth. We hooked up to a fire hydrant over there, and we could put a vacuum on that fire hydrant with a booster hose. They didn't have no fire mains over there. I don't know what they've ever done with it. I'm satisfied. I hope that they increased the size of the fire mains in Hamilton Lakes area, because those were on 2-inch water pipe.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
No pressure there.
No pressure. We could put a vacuum with a booster hose. So I couldn't do any instructions over there. And back then, when I first came here, we didn't have a test pit. That was another thing that I pushed for to put out there, and I don't know where I did any good at doing it, but we finally got one out there at the training center. But we used to have to go all the way out to Lake Higgins to run the test on. As you know, a lot has changed since you retired. Everything's computerized just about now. And there was no computers in here when I came to work here, nowhere. And I got the first computer in the fire department in the shop by talking too much. But we had a guy that come in here that wasn't too old, I don't guess, but Lovelace, I'll put it in there anyway. He knew my feelings anyway. But he was a good guy, and he was trying to do a good job. He come to me one time and wanted to know, says, anything I can do to help you in the shop out here? I says, yeah. I says, why can't I get a computer here in the shop to handle this fleet maintenance? I says, fleet maintenance, and the city's got a computer that they keep records and all that stuff. And I said, it would save me having to come here at night and do a lot of my paperwork, which I did. I'd go over there at night and do the paperwork, and I'd do mechanic work in the daytime when I was there. But I had got everything set up where I knew what was going on. And so he said, I'll see what I can do. He went and talked to Chief Boucher about it, and Boucher was the chief at that time, and of course Moon had done retired. And Boucher called me up and says, what is this I hear about you on the computer? I says, yeah, I have mentioned it to you before, that we could stand a computer. I says, I have no idea one, I wouldn't even know how to turn one on. But I know what they can do. I says, yeah, we need some way to keep this record that don't have to sit you down at a desk all the time to do the paperwork. And I says, then I know computers can do that for us. And he said, well, get some figures. And so I did. I gathered up some information, and I contacted the people that handle the fleet maintenance, one at the city, and come to find out that software company is owned by Cummins Diesel. It's called MainStem, was the one that they were using then. I think they've changed now, but at that time, MainStem was owned by Cummins Diesel. So I contacted Cummins down there, and I contacted the MainStem people in New Jersey. They sent a guy down, sat down with him, and went over what we had to come up with, what the National Board needed, what I needed for records. So they could tell me what it cost to run one and how much I was spending on it, but I needed these other records involved. So, in probably about an hour's time, he said, yeah, we can write that program for you. He says, there's a couple of things you'll have to do for yourself on it. And I said, okay. So we got the system set up. We had the first computers in the shop.
We hope you enjoyed watching these documentaries. It was our goal to share and preserve the memories of our retired Greensboro firefighters. It is our desire that these documentaries will inspire future generations to continue the brotherhood, sisterhood, and camaraderie while always striving for excellence in their careers. While fire apparatus, equipment, and technology have improved, several things will always remain the same. The courage and bravery it takes to mitigate natural and man-made disasters will always be a part of the job. Although our retirees are no longer a physical part of the GFD world, a giant piece of each retiree's memories have been shared with you today. These memories will be in their hearts and minds forever. A special thank you goes out to Captain Harold Haney for his many long hours of recording and editing. Thank you, Harold. A job well done.